Hey, have you seen the new guy? He's got a pretty cool looking sword. Nah, I mean, sure, it looks cool. Bronze is ultimately inferior as a metal. If I'm not mistaken, the design looks like real familiar. I don't know what you mean. Good morning to you, lads. What are the two of you talking about? Oh, are we married to that accent? I mean, the Celts were a large group of people. They're the insular Celts, the continental Celts. It was, you know, eastern, southern, what have you. I don't think that's kind of a generality, I think, when people think of Celts. Well, to be fair, it's getting a little difficult to tell the characters apart, so I figured maybe an accent was needed too. Well, yeah, okay, that's fair. I mean, it's a terrible accent, like you're horrible at it, but it would be nice to differentiate a little bit. So yeah, I'll let it slide this time. I see no problem with it. Celts are Celts. I mean, some had like slightly reddish hair and some had more blonde hair, but it's kind of the same thing. It's like the general thing is Celts. Well then, that seems a bit oversimplified, but I'll tell you what, definitely seems like a very Roman way to look at it. All right, whatever. But yeah, no, that is a really cool sword you got there. Hopefully you never have to hit anything with it. How dare you? Why does everyone spit? I know it may be a bit difficult for you to grasp, but it's not the material of the sword. It's the spirit of the warrior that counts. Okay, well, you care to put that to a test? Friendly wager, perhaps? Oh, you must think I was born yesterday. I know better than to make deals with your Romans. He's not wrong. You guys are not super good about keeping your promises to other barbarian cultures. That's propaganda and lies. Anyways, enough of that now. What's your wager? Well, you know, it's actually quite simple. I want to see if that sword you got there can actually stand up to any physical abuse, damage, what it'll do against armor or bone, things like that. What do I get if I win? That's the best part. You get the honor of being assimilated into our glorious empire. You know something? I really don't care for you at all. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerd and nerdettes. Now, thankfully for you, you're not gonna have to suffer through my horrendous accent through the course of this video, but you are going to have to suffer through my mustache. Because in Celtic culture, a mustache, a large mustache, was a sign of strength, masculinity, and virility. And that's what we are all about. This is gonna be a very exciting test for me to do. I actually have a bronze sword. It's sharpened, it was sent to me by Cult of Athena. I have this sword here as well. This one's a high carbon steel with a bronze handle or bronze hilt on it. And then I have my leaf-shaped spear as well. So we are going full Celtic in all of our armaments. And I want to take a minute to quickly thank Metatron for plugging one of my videos last week. Again, he tried to help it out. He saw it was underperforming. It was very generous of him, so thank you. But then in doing this, I looked at my ancestry DNA real quick just because I was curious, and it turns out I'm predominantly Celtic. And so I think that you and me, we may historically be enemies, but doesn't mean we can't be friends now, but I'm watching you. So in the late Bronze Age, about 1200 to 800 BC, there was the Hallstatt culture. There was 4 different tiers of it, A, B, C, and D. I'm gonna be focusing mainly on A and B because that was late bronze. And that's because I have here a bronze sword. This was cast from bronze, 90% copper, 10% tin. It has a solid bronze handle as well. And this one right here has a bronze handle also. What I wanna do for this is I wanna test and see how it performs versus bone, first of all. And then I want to test to see how it does against different armors of the time, being linen, possibly lenothorax. And let's say if someone were to carry or have a family heirloom that was a bronze sword and take it against stuff from the Iron Age, i.e. chainmail and different things like that. And then I want to end with a test and see how it performs against a modern steel sword. So what I have here again is a cow femur. Now I like cow femurs because they are thicker than humans, and I feel like with the way that it's being done, the impact that's being dispersed to it, I want a thicker bone to give a more realistic result. What I additionally did was I have 2 layers of thick foam from a foam rolling mat here, so I rolled those up together to simulate muscle. So if you got that Sir Gaines muscle, And then I have this surface here, which is like a yoga mat. And it's a little bit of a tacky substance, similar to the thickness of like what human skin would be. I feel like it does grab things well, so it'll be representative of what skin would do against such a blow. So we're set up here for test number 1. This is basically just bare bone against a bronze sword. So it's got a little bit of give. I think it'll be a little more representative of how a human would move if struck. I'm gonna try and hit it right here. One good solid strike, and I'm gonna take a look and see how it does, how it cuts into it, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we have our first strike with the bronze sword. That went through the skin here, through the 2 layers of this foam here, and then it went into the bone. So it went into the bone about that deep. So it cut into it a small amount, but not a substantial amount. However, the really interesting thing, and the reason you can see why bronze swords were obviously inferior to iron and steel, is that strike right there against the bone, it's very malleable. So even though this has an extremely sharp edge to it, that bent it in right there just against the bone. So that strike alone caused a large deformation in it. Now these were malleable and they could be hammered back out, and they had a long lifespan generationally because they could be fixed relatively easily. But you can definitely see right there, that was that strike. That's pretty cool. Now one thing that is really interesting about this sword is because the pommel is made of bronze, it is actually very heavy. And so what I want to do is there's just enough room to kind of get 2 hands on this. It wouldn't be used for that, but I want to try and get a better strike with 2 hands against that setup, against what a bone would be like, to see if I can make a deeper cut into it. So I'm going to turn it this way here, try and hit it on the top more so I have more leverage and momentum coming down into it, and see if that makes a better, deeper cut. Okay, so we are set up here for round number 2. I'm going to try this with this side. I want to make sure I hit it with the bulbous part of the head so I have that cutting motion, I have more power, momentum coming into it, and I want to see how it does with a slash against this here. Okay, so for test number 2 with the better strike, hitting more towards the top of the sword using 2 hands, it was a much better cut. That one went in here probably about a good ½ inch into the bone as well. However, with that extra power, that extra impact, you can see that it caused the sword to be damaged even a little bit more. And so you can see I kind of cut into it at an angle, but it caught and it bent it out of shape right there. So I feel like with this, edge alignment would be extremely important to make sure you get that in there. And what I want to do for the last one, before I move on, I want to try one against just the bone, get a better idea of what it looks like cutting into it. I think that'd be a really great shot. I'm going to use this edge right here, which is still undamaged, try and come on, again, just get as much momentum as possible, try to slash through it to get a better cut, and this will be very close up of what it's going to look like. So I tried to mitigate the damage a little bit by slicing through it, let's say, so not coming straight on it, but trying to pull through. But even with that, and you can see with that graze in there, it still just punched it out a substantial amount. I mean, this thing still has a great edge on it. They sharpened it extremely well, but there's just a limit to what bronze can do. And you can definitely see why that is, in fact, an inferior metal for steel or armor, etc. It looks very flashy. I'm gonna have a fun time fixing this back up, but even against that bone, that's taking some serious damage and abuse right there. Okay, so before we move on to the next test, I want to take this out. This is an ancient Aegean Naue sword, I believe it said. It's a very common sword in that time, kind of like the forefather of a gladius, a lot of people would say. But this right here is a bronze pommel with a C60 carbon steel blade. So it's of the time, but not of the metal of the time. So before we move on, I want to see how this does against that bone in there and see what the difference would be with something that's lighter, but a more modern metal. So the difference between those two is sizable. This for one is lighter, single-handed swing. It hit here and it dulled a little bit, like microchips in there, but didn't actually deform the blade. And you can see where it hit bone here. It cut in about almost a quarter of the way through that bone with just that single-handed slash. So a marked difference between the materials, of course. So let's move on to some thrusting. Say thrusting, what we're gonna do is we're gonna test it against like what would be the cheapest armor of the time. Let's say this is 29 layers of quilted together linen. So just like one of the potential lenothorax type armors. So this is very thick. I've tested it in the past here and here, but I'm gonna try and get it in a fresh spot right here with the thrust of the bronze sword, because I'm very curious to see how it reacts when it hits a soft spot, if it's gonna just deform dramatically or it's gonna keep more of a rigid structure. I feel like it's gonna really have a lot of bend in there, but we'll find out together. We have our lenothorax set up here on a very unfortunate Roman, or fortunate, depending on how it goes. Just so you know, this is a grappling dummy here. So this is a very thick canvas, almost like a seat belt, and it's very densely packed underneath it. You can see here with clothing and other things like that. So it provides a really solid backdrop, probably a bit thicker than human would be, but you know, with ribs and everything, I think it'd probably be somewhat close. So I just want to see how it performs against that with a thrust. So neither of those were able to make it all the way through. My strikes were here and here. And so those punched in probably through like 5 or 6 of the layers, but not enough. I want to try it against like the hay bale, because that's going to have more give, and I want to see if I have less resistance behind it, if I can get it through. Oh. So yeah, I'm sure you can see that did not work. I was not able to pierce through the layers. The good thing about bronze, however, is that if it gets a little out of shape, you can just bend it back in relatively easily. So no problems there, but I can definitely feel at the back it gets a weaker point as well. But this is crazy malleable. I've never had a bronze weapon before, and just the ease at which it bends and moves is pretty insane. So it's extremely cool to have as a sword, but practically against any sort of defenses, it really does struggle substantially. Let the bronze sword have a go against this linen here. So what I want to try now is the modern steel with this short thrusting sword. I feel like it's going to perform very well because it's new, very sharp, a high carbon content, and it's going to be great for thrusting. It won't have as much bend in it because it's not as long. So I have high hopes for this one. With that one there, yeah, okay, so we got good clearance through all 29 layers and actually went into the padded dummy as well. So that's like an additional, you know, quite a few there. So this did exceptionally well against that. That thrusting sword, really you can see how it shines in that close proximity versus something that's longer, because the longer ones with a longer blade tend to have a little more flex. This is just a rigid piece of steel, so it's great. Put that thrusting motion in there. And you know, that's obviously exceptionally good. So that was fun. Always good to see a fun result. So the bronze sword has already been through a lot. I'm gonna save this now until we get to the final test where I go against modern steel sword to see how it performs. But in the meantime, I'm gonna go on to the mail test, the chain mail. So this won't do much against mail. I think that when I come out here, a lot of times I have an idea of what might happen. I didn't know how far this would make it, so I'm gonna audible that a little bit because we're gonna use this short sword here against the quilted linen and the mail, and we're going to use the leaf tip spear. Just in case you were curious about how all this looks, you have the bone in here. I'm going to flip it around to a side that's uncompromised on the back. I have my 2 layers of thick foam here, and I have my quasi skin right here. This I'm going to wrap up, and then I zip tie that all together. So that's going to look like that. Then I'm going to take my quilted linen here as, let's say, the undergarment. And then I'm gonna have the riveted mail here. So again, this isn't cheap butted mail. This is quality made riveted mail, 8mm flat. It's been through some abuse, but there's some spots here that aren't really compromised. That's what I'm gonna go for. I'm gonna zip tie these on here and set it up on our dummy. We have our armor and our bone inside of there. I'm gonna try some thrusting with the short sword to see if I can get through everything into the actual bone. And then if I cannot do that, I'm gonna move on to the leaf spear. So with that strike, I was able to get through the padded gambeson, the chainmail, both layers of this, the skin, and leave a small puncture right in here. So that just made it barely into the bone right there, but that was that strike right in there. So it was enough to penetrate all of that and actually go in. Now it didn't do much damage, it didn't go super deep. You can see on the side here, it kind of broke some of the muscle tissue and fiber and just chipped the bone a little bit. But that thrust was enough to get in through all of that and actually make it onto the bone here. So that's actually pretty cool. That's all the layers of protection you'd have, enough to go through and cause some damage on the inside. So that was a surprising result. I did not see that happening. That's one of those ones that shocked me. We are set up for one final run against all the armor. What we have here is a leaf-shaped spearhead. So this is very sharp. Again, this is a modern steel, it's a carbon steel. And I'm gonna try and thrust against all of that armor in there and see if I can get in through the bone and make a better damage than the short sword. Well, you know what? That was actually quite surprising. This did not do as well as the short sword. And I think part of that comes from the fact that this tip here is so much narrower and more pronounced than this one. This kind of got caught up in here, I think, on the thrust. So it was larger, so it would go through the mail, but it couldn't get through the rest of it. It would lose a lot of momentum and energy. And this one here was able just to slide through it like it was nothing. So that was a surprising result to me as well. Could just be the way I did it, my thrust. But I mean, just in my own little anecdotal testing, this definitely outperformed the spear in that. However, before we move on to the final test, if you thought that we were going to leave a perfectly intact bone set in there behind some armor, you are wrong, because right now we are going to test some blunt damage against that armor. And what did our intrepid Kanabo do to this bone inside? Well, let's find out together, shall we? Did it survive? Was there enough padding and cushion between all the layers to handle that impact? Moment of truth, nope. Even with all of this, the shock absorption, the skin, this here, the male, that strike was enough just to crack that bone with no problem at all. So blunt damage, blunt force trauma is a real thing, guys. I didn't know if you knew that, but it's real. So the last thing I want to end with here is the world's shortest Legionnaire. This is a 1045 sword. This has been through a lot of abuse. If you're not familiar with it, 1045 is like just above like a wall hanger, the lowest quality you can have to have a functional sword. So this one is a lot of metal. It's been through tons of abuse. And I want to see how bronze would handle against something like this. What exactly transpired there? Well, this really had no ill effects. You can already see there's a bunch of chips in it from the past, but the sword here, when I hit that, you can just see how it just completely malforms upon that impact and that strike cuts it. And I feel like if I hit it hard enough with a sharp enough and sturdy enough sword, I could probably cut this thing in half realistically with a good enough strike, because that really did slice into it like it was like butter. You know, it's just such a different type of material to work with that it's really, really interesting to see how it reacts. I knew it would obviously be malleable, but the way in which it was really cool. At the end of the video, you may be asking the same question. Where do I get the money to do all this stuff? Well, the truth is that I don't buy much of this. I am thankfully sent most of this stuff by Cult of Athena. They are an affiliate of mine. I have an affiliate link, and they have been incredibly generous. Just if I have a thought in my head and I say, hey, I've always wanted to try something bronze, they're like, great, we'll get it out to you. We'll ship it out to you. So if you guys ever want to buy anything, like none of these are reviews of their weapons or anything. It's all based on a theme that I want to do, but they have been so good and so kind to me. So if you want to buy something from a great place that sells a lot of different tiers of quality from low to high, check out Cult of Athena, because they really have been amazing. They've been a godsend for this channel where I can do all these things and share all this with you. Special thanks to them. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it.